It is the Resistance Report for May 22nd, 2017. Good evening. 2 weeks ago, when I last talked to you, things were a little bit different than they are right now. A few things have happened with regard to Donald Trump, the Trump administration, and the power that Donald Trump has. He still has power. He's still obviously in the White House, but grave questions have been raised about, and I want to use this term advisedly, obstruction of justice. Every day it seems there is more evidence that Donald Trump has been engaged in an intentional obstruction of justice, and that is an impeachable offense. That was one of the key impeachable offenses underlying the impeachment charges against Richard Nixon, against Bill Clinton. In fact, obstruction of justice is clearly an impeachable offense. Today, a report that after FBI Director James Comey told the House Intelligence Committee on March 20th that the FBI was investigating possible links between Trump and Russia, Trump made several appeals to the Director of National Intelligence, Daniel Coats, and to Admiral Michael Rogers, the Director of the National Security Agency, urging them to publicly deny the existence of any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. Both of them refused. Both of them felt that that overture by Donald Trump was inappropriate. Very, very close parallels, echoes to President Richard Nixon's, his unsuccessful effort, I don't know, some of you may remember, to get the CIA to shut down the FBI's investigation of the Watergate break-in on national security grounds. Richard Nixon never succeeded, but that attempt was part of the charge of obstruction of justice that went from the House Judiciary Committee on its way to the full House. Now add to this the growing body of evidence we have that Trump sought to co-opt and then undermine Comey before he was fired on May 9th. According to notes kept by Comey, Trump first asked for his loyalty at a dinner in January, and then at a meeting the next month asked him to drop the probe of Flynn. Trump disputes these accounts, but there is enough evidence. You know, when I hear Trump supporters say, well, there's no evidence. Well, obviously there is evidence. The question is whether the evidence is enough to convict, or whether the evidence is enough to bring impeachment proceedings. Obviously there is evidence, and the real question before all of us should be whether there is adequate evidence to begin an investigation leading to impeachment. Now, there is enough evidence, in my mind, to reach that threshold of at least inquiring as to whether there's enough to impeachment. But you see, this is not going to happen. This is a complete exercise in just guesswork, unless you have 23 Republicans who are willing to put party behind country. This is all a matter of politics, folks. This is where politics fundamentally comes in, because 23 Republicans would have to join with Democrats to get Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, to go along with a bill of impeachment. And the odds of this occurring under this Congress at the present time are approximately zero. Barring a smoking gun that shows Trump's complicity with Russian operatives in interfering in the 2016 election, Trump's fate will hinge on the 2018 midterm election. And that's obviously where you come in. So all of this begins focusing more and more on the 2018 midterms. Don't think for a minute that the appointment of Robert Mueller as special counsel to the investigation into the collusion will bring this any closer to resolution anytime soon, because that investigation is likely to drag on. Mueller's investigation is probably not going to find a smoking gun. There may be a lot of subpoenas issued. There's going to be resistance to those subpoenas. In fact, Trump is going to try to fight that every step of the way. Here is where Trump really does differ in personality from Richard Nixon, as far as I can tell. Donald Trump's defining characteristics are, number one, he will do anything to win. Even if it's illegal, he will do it. In fact, that may be why he really did collude with the Russians to win the election. He will do anything to win. But secondly, he feels invulnerable. You remember his comment about that he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and he wouldn't lose a single vote? That invulnerability, that sense that he can get away with it, is also a defining characteristic. Put those two together. He'll do anything to win, and he can get away with anything. And what you get is a personality that will fight Robert Mueller and this investigation to the bitter, bitter end. Now, Richard Nixon was very different. Richard Nixon had a lot of Trump's attributes, but Richard Nixon was smarter, cagier than Trump. And Richard Nixon also knew when he had lost. Richard Nixon, if you remember, resigned after the House Judiciary Committee approved 3 articles of impeachment against him, but before the House could even vote on the impeachment resolutions. And remember also, the thing to bear in mind here is that even after the House, assuming that the House does, comes up with a bill of impeachment against Donald Trump on one of these grounds, and it doesn't have to be the ground we're talking about. There's also the emoluments clause. There's a lot else going on that Trump could be impeached for. But even after the House comes up with that bill of impeachment, it then has to go to the Senate, where the Senate has to have a 2/3 majority in order to convict of impeachment. Bill Clinton did not have a 2/3 majority. That's why Bill Clinton, even though he was impeached by the House, was not convicted of impeachment by the Senate. Even Andrew Johnson. Remember Andrew Johnson? Andrew Johnson, he was the president after Abraham Lincoln. He was also impeached by the House, and he was not convicted in the Senate. In fact, he came 1 vote short of not being convicted. Andrew Johnson, you might want to study up on Andrew Johnson, because Andrew Johnson is known among historians as one of the worst presidents the United States has ever had. Just thought you were interested and you might see some parallels. So Mueller, Robert Mueller, the new special counsel, he's got to find something like a smoking gun that is so outrageous that there is a public outcry that is almost deafening in order to get even a possibility of a 2/3 Senate vote to get rid of Donald Trump, assuming that the Senate, I'm assuming the Senate is not completely flipped so much to the Democrats that there are 2/3 Democrats there. That's certainly not going to happen. And only at that point will Donald Trump resign. He's not going to wait to be convicted. He'll count noses, and if the Senate, if there is actually any reasonable prospect of him being convicted in the Senate, he will then resign, because he obviously doesn't want to lose, and he can't stand to lose. And at that time, he will also leave behind millions of followers who will believe that he has been undermined by a conspiracy. Not a happy time. And meanwhile, today, Michael Flynn, speaking of Michael Flynn, he won't comply with a subpoena that has been issued by the Senate for records for Michael Flynn's business, presumably, he says, on his lawyer says, on Fifth Amendment grounds. But here's the interesting thing. The Fifth Amendment does not cover records. It doesn't cover pieces of paper. The Fifth Amendment protects you against saying things that incriminate yourself here and now. It doesn't cover records of past incriminating things that you might have said or you might have done. And so Michael Flynn risks the Senate holding him in contempt for not complying with a subpoena. And that's an interesting political question, whether the Senate would go that far. The Senate could, and the Senate has in the past. I think that this, again, is a political issue. It depends on how much public attention this gets. The Senate doesn't want to get even a bit of a reputation as letting people go, particularly who might have very incriminating evidence about whether it is the Trump connection or any other ethical violation. But at the same time, the Senate Republicans would rather not issue a contempt citation if they can get away with not doing it. So here too, once again, you and public pressure and your pressure become critically important in terms of deciding even the fate of Michael Flynn, which means that, again, you are needed more than ever. And that's not even to mention all of the things that this administration is doing or about to do. The Senate will vote soon on Trump Care, its version of Trump Care. Whatever it comes up with Trump Care will then have to go to a conference committee to iron out differences with the House. Will then go back to both houses, both chambers of Congress. So there will be a process, but your views are going to be critically important here. They already have been critically important. Tomorrow, Donald Trump and the White House send to Congress their final budget. And that budget, for what we can gather, is extraordinary. I mean, when I say horrendous, I am not exaggerating. It's going to be cutting massively from Medicaid and food stamps and programs that people desperately need. I'm talking tens of billions of dollars. Millions of people who are going to actually lose their footing, people who are very, very vulnerable in our society, all for the purpose of expanding the military and giving a big tax cut to corporations and very wealthy people. And this, I don't think, this would even make Ronald Reagan cringe. Now, this is on the basis of what I have learned about it today. We'll know much more tomorrow, because tomorrow it's officially being released. And then there's also Jeff Sessions and everything that Scott Pruitt and Betsy DeVos will be up to. So in other words, there is no reason for anybody to sing Ding Dong, the witch is dead. There is reason to think that we are making progress. There is reason to pat ourselves, all of us, on the back, all Americans, for standing up and being heard and making demands and not allowing Donald Trump and his administration to get away with everything. But we have a huge amount of work to do. When I left for a vacation, I was frankly suffering from a little bit of what you might call Trump exhaustion, or Trump vertigo, or Trump nausea, Trump numbness. I don't know what the exact definition or the disease is, but I had it, and I can certainly understand most of you have not had the delightful opportunity I had to take almost 2 weeks off, and you undoubtedly have had it up to here with Trump. And the problem is he is such an unhinged narcissist with the attention span of a fruit fly. And impulsive and compulsive and repulsive all at the same time. It's just hard to manage Donald Trump on a day-to-day basis. And I was meeting with European ministers and officials, and I wanted to talk about a lot of things. All they wanted to talk about was Donald Trump. I wanted to get away from Donald Trump. All they wanted to talk about was Donald Trump. I met a few friends in Europe, and I'd sit down with them over dinner and say, well, how are you? What's going on? And they would say, well, tell us about Donald Trump. I couldn't get away. So I understand your fatigue. My only advice to you is to pace yourself. This is like a long-distance run. This is a marathon. We are all involved. And we are all in this for the long haul. The only silver lining on this nightmare of a cloud called Donald Trump, the only silver lining is how many of you have become activist citizens. And I mean that. And your children and your grandchildren will appreciate what you are doing. By the way, if you haven't already, please make sure you get together with other people in your area. Just consult with indivisibleguide.org. I said com. It should be com. indivisibleguide.com. and also swingleft.org, which is very, very useful for finding districts near you that you can help with. So those are the ones I would very, very definitely consult with. Sisterdistrict.com is also very useful, and runforsomething.net. I'm going to hold these up so there is no doubt that you are seeing them. All right? Okay, now time for your questions. Patricia Honyantulis. I know you needed a break, but you were missed. Glad you're back. Thank you, Patricia. Chris Reap. I am afraid that Trump's trip will cause people to feel more positive about him, statesman-like behavior, and so on. What do you think? Chris, it has been a tradition with presidents. They go abroad because they do want a reprieve from domestic politics, and they do want to look more statesman-like, and they want to represent America. But Donald Trump is such a fool that, he's already made stumbles. He's already acted a little bit absurd. And once he actually gets to Europe and is talking to NATO, I worry, frankly, more that he's going to do something really stupid than I worry that he is going to act like a statesman. I mean, he's as close to a statesman as this shape is to a round object. Peter Grossman, did Trump give away classified information today when he told reporters in Israel that he never mentioned Israel when he spoke to Russian officials in the Oval Office on May 16th about intelligence concerning the Islamic State? Well, Peter, this is a good example of what I was just talking to Chris about a moment ago. Because obviously, when nobody accused Donald Trump of actually giving away the information that whatever he told Russian officials, that classified information, came from an Israeli source. We didn't know that until today, when Donald Trump at a news conference in Israel says he did not mention Israel to the Russians. Why would he say he did not mention Israel to the Russians if, in fact, Israel was not on his mind and had been something that possibly, in fact, probably was passed on to the Russians? You see what I'm talking about? You see how embarrassing Donald Trump is and how dangerous he is at the same time? Barbara Stewart, does democracy have any hope of standing up to the enormous wealth influencing our elections? Is a strong middle class a thing of the past? Barbara, we have no choice. Let me just stay there for 1 second. On another one of my bookshelves, I have this. This is Louis Brandeis. He is a famous justice of the Supreme Court, and the reason I am showing him to you is that he is very, very well known for the following statement. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. This is the question you asked. Louis Brandeis answered that question years ago. In fact, in the decades after the last great concentration of wealth in the United States, which was the Gilded Age of the 1880s and 1890s. And Louis Brandeis and many others, Teddy Roosevelt and others, for years passed reforms, the progressive era in the United States, starting in the year 1901, and really, to some extent, extending all the way through the New Deal. Those reforms did constrain wealth in the political process. And so it is possible. We've done it before. We will do it again. Janice Rogan. Will Republicans be able to get Trump care passed with 51 votes in the Senate? Janice, this is a very interesting question, because what they want to do is use a process called reconciliation, which allows, it's a special process by the rules in the Senate to allow particular bills that are basically budgetary bills that have to do with taxes and spending and balancing or not balancing the budget to move through on 51 votes. Anything that is not germane to the budget cannot get through on just 51 votes. And so there is going to be there's likely to be a big parliamentary fight in the Senate as to whether aspects of Trump care particularly the aspects having to do with the House's idea. Remember, the House of Representatives has this idea, and the only way they got conservatives to go along with them, the Freedom Caucus, so-called, is to give states the option of opting out of Trump care, of Obamacare, of the Affordable Care Act. And that opting out, being excused from the regulations governing pre-existing conditions and governing the minimum health care that insurance had to provide, those opting out regulations have nothing whatever to do with budgetary issues. And so they cannot get through the Senate on 51 votes. They're going to need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster by the Senate, by the Democratic senators. Do you follow me? It sounds very, very small and tiny, but this is big, and this is going to be very, very important. Layla Cawthon, do you think Trump will fire Mueller as special prosecutor? If so, then what other recourse will there be? Well, Layla, unlike the special prosecutor law that was passed in 1978 after the Watergate scandal, that law was not reauthorized after 1999. That law only went from 1978 to 1999. That law kept the special prosecutor completely independent of the president and the Justice Department. So we could never have a repeat between 1978 and 1999 of what happened when Richard Nixon fired Archibald Cox, who was then the special prosecutor. But now it is possible for Donald Trump to fire Mueller. He could do it. I think, again, on the principle, remember I said there are two motivating characteristics with regard to Donald Trump. One is he will do anything to win at whatever cost, even if it is illegal. And secondly, he thinks he is invulnerable. And on that basis, if Mueller gets very close to a smoking gun, I would not be surprised if Donald Trump fired him. There will be a huge public outcry, but Donald Trump will probably say, so what? You know, remember, I'm the guy who could go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I'd still be supported. Tressel Sweet, welcome back. Thank you, Tressel. Robert, with all the noise around the Russian investigation and 45's trip abroad, it seems like there are some pretty harmful pieces of legislation going through. How can we bring light to this? I'm a teacher, and what Trump and DeVos are doing to defund public schools is awful. What can we do? Well, here's what you can do. Number one, hopefully with your indivisible group or with others, you can make sure you know what is going on. Now, it is not easy always to make sure you know. It's not always easy to find out because the headlines, even reputable newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, they don't cover this degree of detail. You need to assign some person in the group to cover education or to cover healthcare or to cover this or cover that, and they need to use investigative tools. They are not difficult to find, but they are time consuming. They need to find out what is happening every day or every week with regard to what the Education Department is doing and what the Labor Department is up to and what especially Jeff Sessions and the Justice Department are doing. You can do that and inform yourself and find out what's happening and then put pressure on your members of Congress, whether they are Democrat or Republican. I don't care. You need to put pressure on them. They need to know their constituents care about this issue. And if it is a big deal, also make sure your local newspapers and local media know about what's happening and how it affects people in your district. And that will get the attention of your members of Congress. Time for two more. Jennifer Sue Minion. Will the impeachment of Trump help at all? Or is Pence an even more willing puppet for the GOP? Jennifer, this comes to a question of your values. I mean, I would rather, frankly, have a president who is a principled right-winger, extreme right-winger like Pence, than I would like to have a sociopath, kind of an unhinged, pathological narcissist, you know, a crazy person who is Donald Trump. I just think it is too dangerous for the country to have Donald Trump there. I would take Pence any day over Trump. Now, you may feel differently about that. One thing, though, that I do want to say and we need to have a conversation about this, maybe this week, is that it is not enough to get rid of Trump. We also have got to face and deal with and address the conditions and forces that led to Donald Trump. I mean, if we have a society that is as unequal as we have right now, surging toward even greater inequality of income and wealth and political power, where so many Americans are so frustrated and so angry and feel so disenfranchised, well, there will be future Trumps. In fact, we're facing a whole line of demagogues because people are so basically disenfranchised. And we've got to, all of us, have got to work to overcome those underlying conditions. Daniel Janish, this is the last question. What is the risk of complacency within the resistance due to the Mueller appointment? Daniel, that's really a sub-theme of what I've tried to talk to you about today. We can't be complacent. We can't be complacent because Mueller is going to take a long time. There's going to be a lot of resistance to what he does. And even if he comes up with something, then we still have got to have the politics of the House and the Senate willing to impeach Donald Trump. And then we have everything else that's going on. All of the administration, or the Trump administration, what the Trump administration is trying to do. So there is absolutely no time, there is no appropriate spot for complacency. We have got to work harder than ever now. And I hate to say that because I know how many people are so tired and exhausted and overwhelmed as I was. And, I've only been back a few days and I'm already back to where I was before. But we have no choice. And on that upbeat note, let me say to you how thankful I am that you are doing everything that you are doing. We are all in this together. This is a test of our citizenship. It's a test of our institutions, of our democracy, a test of our Constitution, and we will prevail. That's the end of tonight's Resistance Report, and I'll see you tomorrow.